Hi, artists of the world. I'm Natalia from Yes Art Marketing, and on this channel, share practical ways to grow your art business, sell more work, and build a creative life that actually feels sustainable. So feel free to subscribe if you'd like more of that. I want to start today's video with a sentence that might sound funny at first, but bear with me because I promise I have a point. And here it is: the algorithm is not a museum grant committee, and neither is your audience. Artists tend to overcomplicate things on social media, and before anyone gets worried that I'm about to tell you to dumb down your work or to become trendy, schmendy, lose your authentic voice, or start communicating through memes exclusively, yeah, or I don't know, GIFs or GIFs, whatever the correct way to pronounce that is. That's not where we're going with this at all. I actually think that one of the best things about art is that it allows us to explore complex ideas, difficult emotions, and experiences that aren't always easy to put into words. Yeah, I mean, if we could, we probably would, right? But we paint instead. And I would never suggest that artists should abandon depth or nuance just because they're posting on social media. But the problem is that while trying to stay authentic, many artists do not do what is needed to get seen by social media, by the algorithm. Yeah. And before you say, oh, well, maybe then social media isn't for me, consider that making complicated things easy to understand is a wonderful skill. And it would be unwise to not even try because ultimately you do want to succeed and you do want to get seen. So why not give it a solid effort before, claiming it impossible? Now, what I'm suggesting is that a lot of artists accidentally make their content much harder to connect with than it needs to be because they're communicating as though every caption, every reel, every social media post is an artist statement being submitted to a panel of curators rather than a piece of content just being shown to an actual human being who is scrolling through their phone, waiting for the bus, eating lunch, or avoiding, I don't know, emails, procrastinating, whatever. I'm a millennial and it doesn't come naturally to me either to express myself in a short and punchy way like kids do these days. And I make jokes about how the way Gen Z communicates online, and I'm all in for making fun about generation differences, but there is something genuinely useful hidden in that observation. Because if you look at how younger generation communicate in social media, one thing they're incredibly good at is taking an idea and making it immediately understandable. And it doesn't mean necessarily simpler or less intelligent, just easier to, grasp in a fraction of a second. And then distinctions matters a lot because, for example, imagine these two ways of describing the same painting, okay? I'm exaggerating for dramatic effect, but imagine this. The first might be something like, this painting explores the fragility of life and the suffering of human soul as it confronts its inevitable mortality. And the second might simply be, we're all doomed. Now, obviously, I'm exaggerating here, but please don't leave this video thinking that I've advised you to replace all of your artist statements with like funny one-liners. I'm not suggesting that you become a comedian, but I think that it's a useful example because most people instantly understand the emotional territory of the second sentence. They know what we're talking about. They get the feeling immediately. They don't have to work particularly hard to access the idea. Yeah, and that's important because social media is a completely different environment from a gallery. When somebody walks into a gallery, they've already decided to give their attention to art. They've made time for it. They're in the right mindset. They're often moving slowly through the space, reading information, observing details, allowing themselves to engage with the work. And social media is almost the exact opposite experience. People are moving fast, they're distracted, they're scrolling through hundreds of pieces of content. They're making split-second decisions about what deserves another 3 seconds of their attention and what doesn't. And when we forget that reality, we sometimes end up creating content that sounds thoughtful and sophisticated and it's beautiful, but it isn't actually communicating very effectively. I see this happen all the time. An artist has spent years developing their ideas, refining their skills, building a body of work, and creating something genuinely meaningful. And then when it comes to talk about that work online, they suddenly start sounding like a completely different person. Instead of sounding like themselves, they start sounding like they've swallowed an academic journal. And the funny thing is that if you met the same artist in real life and asked them about their work over coffee, they would probably explain it in a way that was far more engaging, far more relatable, and far more memorable. If you sat across them and asked, so what inspired this series? They probably wouldn't respond with a carefully constructed paragraph full of abstract terminology and complex language. They would say something like, I've always been fascinated by abandoned places, or I'm slightly obsessed with nostalgia. I started painting because I missed home. And suddenly you're interested, you feel something, it resonates with you, you're having a conversation. And this is the real lesson here, I think, that the goal of content isn't to impress people. The goal is to help people understand and connect instantly, okay? Those two things are not always the same. In fact, I think artists often fall into the trap of trying so hard art to sound intelligent that they accidentally create distance between themselves and the people they're trying to reach. And on social media, it makes a lot more sense to be approachable rather than mysterious. The mysterious, intelligent, sophisticated image can work, but only when you're already somewhat established and have a fan base. Because when we're trying to impress people, we tend to make things more complicated. We choose bigger words, we add more explanations, we try to sound professional, we try to sound important, we try to sound like what we imagine a successful artist should sound like. But when we're trying to connect with people, we do something very different. We focus on clarity, we focus on stories, on feelings, we focus on helping someone understand what we're trying to say as quickly as possible. We get to the point faster. And what's interesting is that clarity doesn't remove depth, okay? It makes depth accessible. Those also are two very different things. And I think a lot of artists secretly worry that if they explain their work too simply, people won't take them seriously. But in reality, the opposite is often true. The artists who communicate really well are usually able to take quite sophisticated ideas and express them in a way that feels human and natural. And let me tell you, people love understanding art. So many of potential buyers can be scared away by something so elaborate, it's hard for them to understand, let alone to want to own it. Yeah. But if there is an amazing, deep, meaningful piece of art that was explained in such simple way that even a person without an art history diploma would instantly react to, they will be happy to have this epiphany, this clarity, and they will connect with the piece and they will want it. Keeping things complicated only seems right, but in reality, what works is the normal human language. It's actually much harder to explain something clearly than it is to explain it poorly with many complicated words. Anybody can make an idea sound complicated. Making it understandable, that takes skill. One exercise I often recommend is imagining that you're explaining your work to a friend. Let's say a smart friend, but that person knows nothing about art. They're not a curator, not a critic, not a grand comedian, not another artist who doesn't understand any of the technique, okay? Just an intelligent average person who is curious, genuinely wants to understand what you're doing. How would you describe your work then? How would you explain why you made it? What story would you tell to a regular person in front of you? Because the chances are that explanation is far more powerful than the version you're currently writing in your captions. And this becomes even more important when we're talking about selling art. Because collectors, buyers, they don't buy artist statements. They buy emotional connections, something that they understand. They buy stories, they buy memories, they buy pieces that make them feel something. Yeah, nobody hangs a painting on their wall because they're impressed by the complexity of the caption. They hang it on the wall because it reminds them of something that they've been through, someone they've loved, a feeling they've experienced, simply because they enjoy living with it. It's the reflection of their own personality as well. Yeah, that's just human behavior. And if that's how people buy art, it makes sense that it's also how people engage with the content. So the next time you're writing a caption or filming a reel, I want you to ask yourself a very simple question. Am I writing this to sound like an artist, or am I writing this to connect with the person? Because there is a difference. And very often the artists who grow online are not necessarily the artists with the most sophisticated ideas. They are the artists who have learned how to communicate those ideas in a way that other people can quickly understand and emotionally connect with. The depth is still there, the nuance, the meaning, everything is still there. But instead of making people work their brains hard to unlock all that, they've created a way for them to get it instantly, the way that invites people in. Clear communication is probably one of the most valuable skills that artists can develop. So the algorithm is indeed not a museum grant committee. It's simply a system trying to figure out whether a real human being finds what you're saying interesting enough to stop scrolling for a moment. And the easier you make it for people to understand your ideas, the easier it becomes for those ideas to be shared, saved, interacted with, and how potential buyers start seeing you online. I'd really love to hear what you think about it in the comments, how the idea of simplifying your ideas makes you feel. And like this video if it was helpful, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.